I'm Mr. MegaManFan. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. You know all the things to do. And today, I'm testing 5 Sega Saturn games that I picked up from Ben's Game Zone. Unfortunately, not everything was smooth sailing. Lupin the Third works. That's not the problem. The problem is, it's even more in Japanese than I expected it to be, and I already expected it to be quite heavy. But this proved to be an almost insurmountable barrier, even for a fan of Lupin the Third. I could not get past the very first room of the game because it appears to be a garage that has a bunch of artifacts storing memories of Lupin, his past adventures, his friends and colleagues like Jigen and Fujiko, and it doesn't really let me play anything. It's just like, here are these Lupin artifacts. You can look at them. You might get a movie clip. You might get a data file. If you get a data file, it's all in Japanese, and you're not really going to be able to read it unless you know the language. And eventually, I just gave in and said, as much as I want to play Lupin the Third, I can't do this without a patch. And here's the problem I have with that. The Sega Saturn patcher is apparently Windows PC operating system. And you know me, I mostly use Macs and Apple products. There isn't an Apple version of it. I do have a Windows laptop, but it's really old and crusty, and I don't trust it to not cough up a lung and die while it's trying to patch a Sega Saturn game. So, unfortunately, even if a patch does exist for Lupin the Third, it's not going to be doable for me at this time. Unfortunately, that's where things went from bad to worse because I was at least able to boot up Lupin the Third, but when it came to Hard Trilogy, my Japanese copy of it, it would go into a loop immediately after showing the opening credits, and it would not go past this point. And I thought, okay, tried to find some ways to work around that using cheat codes and other things, but you can't get past it, and it's a known issue. It's just incompatible with the action replay. And how am I supposed to boot out of region Japanese games without using the action replay? Because if you try, the Sega Saturn just tells you this is not a compatible disc. It reads the region encoding and says no. So your choice is either original Japanese Sega Saturn hardware or an action replay or a mod that lets you switch between different regions. So I was pretty much stuck at this point. I did have an idea I would come back to later, but for now I'm moving on to Space Hulk, which maybe this is my fault for assuming that somehow ties into the Hulk of the Marvel Universe fame, but Space Hulk and the Hulk are definitely not the same thing, and I should have been paying a little more attention when I picked this up, but I actually thought it was a good value because a lot of the Sega Saturn games I don't have are over $100, and this one was only $42, so I was like, yeah, you know what? Space Hulk. Let's give the Hulk in outer space a chance. That is definitely not what this game is. It appears to be some sort of aliens predator type game in outer space where you're boarding the ship and all these different monsters have taken over the ship and are very hostile to human life. They want to see you dead for whatever reasons they have. Maybe they're just trying to take over outer space. Maybe they're trying to eradicate humanity and steal their ships and conquer the universe. I don't know what their goals are, but you get attacked almost immediately. You have no time to react. You take 1 foot forward and there they are. And you don't seem to have a melee attack, and you've got some sort of flamethrower weapon, but it keeps running out of ammo when you use it. And it's got tank controls, so even if you're using a Bluetooth wireless adapter, You're stuck using the D-pad for your limited range of movement, and it's too overwhelming. The game doesn't even give you any kind of warm-up. It just throws you in and says, here you go, try not to die, and you just end up dying repeatedly anyway. Now, I'm not saying I'm giving up on Space Hulk altogether. It does look intriguing. It's not what I expected it to be, but it does seem like there's a lot of different menu options for missions and depth in the game itself. If I can get past the fact that it's so easy to die so quickly. So I will come back to Space Hulk at a later date, but for right now, it's just a little too much for me. It's too brutal, too fast, and until I get a better hang of the controls and figure out a way to not instantly get killed every time I run into one of these things, it's going to be problematic. At least in this second attempt, I was able to explore for a little bit, and it even seemed like there was another Space Hulk colleague here with me, but just as before, I started getting overwhelmed, and then I wound up dead. Space Hulk is pretty unforgiving. So now I'm moving on to Cyber Speedway. Also a surprisingly affordable Sega Saturn game. It must have been one of the more popular Sega Saturn games and sold pretty well, even though the Saturn was a commercial disappointment in North America and did much better in Japan, which is why I bought Hard Trilogy, because Japanese games are so much more affordable than their American counterparts. So I was really hoping that one would work, but I'm getting off track here. What I'm saying is, I think Cyber Speedway must have been some kind of a hit for Sega Saturn in North America, or there's just very little demand for it for me to be able to get a Saturn game for that reasonable of a price. And I can see the appeal here because it's a racing game. It's a very, what do I want to say, F-Zero X type racing game. Full 3D on a track with boosters, and it appears that there are even power-ups you can pick up along the way. It's got a nice visual flair to it. It's definitely one I'm going to be coming back to, but I have more games to test, so let's get to bottom of the ninth. And if you know Sega Saturn, then you know what I'm about to say, and if you don't, then you're going to learn something here. Sports games are the cheapest games on Sega Saturn. If you want to flesh out your collection, that is the place to start. Anything that's baseball, football, hockey, soccer, you name it, those are the bottom of the bin cheapest Sega Saturn games. I've got this sneaking suspicion that among some gamers, it was considered the serious game console if you wanted to play sports games. Like, yeah, the PlayStation's okay, Nintendo 64, but Sega Saturn, oh yeah, play your sports games on that. So that must be why there's just an absolute abundance of low-cost sports games for Sega Saturn. If you just want games to play, start there. If you're trying to beef up your collection a little bit, start there. You're never going to have any shortage of Sega Saturn sports games. Even if you go to a store and they only have one Sega Saturn game on the shelf, it's probably going to be a sports game. Now, if you're wondering how I got Hard Trilogy to load after everything I said earlier, well, I kind of didn't. This is actually running on the Sega Satiator. I found a disk image of Hard Trilogy. I put it on an SD card. I updated the firmware for the Satiator, and I'm mostly able to play Hard Trilogy. Die Harder both seem to work fine. Die Hard with a Vengeance, for some reason, it doesn't like that. It just freezes on the loading screen. But the original first part of the trilogy, based on the very first movie, that I can play. Although, fair warning, if you've never played Hard Trilogy before, it's tank controls. So, whatever you were thinking about controlling John McClane, it's going to be more like Tomb Raider than what you probably expected. So you're going to have to get used to that, but once you do, Die Hard is fun. I wish I could play Die Hard with a vengeance, but I'll settle for playing any part of the Die Hard trilogy versus none at all. And as you can see, it's a very fast-moving shooter game where you've got swarms of bad guys who are very hostile to John's existence and want him dead, and they've also kidnapped hostages and are holding them in various rooms, and they'll scream, "Help me, help me!" And you get into those rooms, and once you touch them, they are freed from their bonds, and John screams, "Get out of here!" And you continue on. One of the nice things about Die Hard Trilogy is that, at least in the first installment, it lets you save your progress. So I decided to take full advantage of that and create a save file and know that I could come back and play this some more later. And that's going to wrap it up for my testing of Sega Saturn games. One was incomprehensible, one was incompatible, but all three North American games worked the way they were supposed to. So on the whole, I'm satisfied. I'm Mr. MegaManFan, and thanks for watching.